Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And it seems like the season is probably coming to an end sooner than later. So you're going to want to make sure that you're jumping on your end of season rewards that you want to get before they're gone, because they're going to be limited to this season. And I think the most coveted ones are typically the elite sets around 1800 rating, and obviously the Gladiator achievement and the Gladiator mount, which is limited to the 3 versus 3 bracket. So in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the data and looking at which specializations and which types of compositions are going to be the ones that are most likely to deliver you success on a shorter time frame, and likely if you're not as skilled, like how far can you really push it even if you're not very good at the game, which specializations are going to be the best for putting you there, and then options as well for other specializations that are a little bit more complex. If you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash the subscribe button. So with this on the Justfar website, which I'll have linked in the description down below, we filtered it to 3v3. We're looking at the last 14 days, and we are looking at the top 5,000 players. You can look at the top 100 if you'd like. You can filter it like this, and you'll see that it does change as far as class representation, but I think top 1,000, top 5,000 is definitely going to be a pretty accurate depiction of which specializations are strong performers in terms of getting you to your goals. So you can see that Holy Paladin, there are 318 Paladins in the top 5,000. It's the most represented specialization. And Discipline Priest is the second most represented specialization at 241. So those healers are definitely standing out as really good, solid, guaranteed options in order to get your team rewards and start bumping them up in terms of success. Holy Paladin is just very easy. It's a lot of instant cast. It has a lot of powerful defensive cooldowns that can get you through a lot of the offensive cooldowns that some of the most popular DPS specializations currently have. Things like Fury Warrior and Beastmastery Hunter are somewhat soft countered by Paladins, if not actually just hard countered by Paladins. So the fact that you counter some of the most popular DPS that are currently in the game, and you have such an easy playstyle at the moment, makes it one of the best picks, and it makes it basically interchangeable in almost any composition. So if you were really going to try and gun for some of these last second rewards, I would highly recommend Holy Paladin based on the data and based on my opinion. Number one, you're a healer, so you're going to be able to really easily get teams, and it's the most versatile healer. Now, Discipline Priest is a little bit more limited in terms of its compositions, but it can be more specialized as well, and it brings the ability to purge, so it can be a little bit of a counter as well to the Paladins that are currently in the meta. I personally find Discipline Priest to be a little bit more fun. I think that you're going to see more bias for Discipline Priest in terms of healing hunters and healing feral druids and healing rogues. I think that those typically are kind of like the three specializations or three classes that go with Discipline Priest a lot more frequently than others, but it is still decently interchangeable because it is still really powerful. And the advantages of Discipline Priest is that you just have so many schools of magic that even if you get interrupted, you have fail safes like Powered Radiance, or you can just apply Purge the Wickets to your enemy targets if you get kicked on a penance, and you can play, the ability to switch into Shadow schools. If you get kicked on a Shadow penance, you can just spam out Flash Heal. So it's much like Holy Paladin, although it's not all just instant casts. You can get away with more mistakes because you have more schools of magic, which makes it a lot easier to succeed on if you're kind of just starting out or trying to push some rewards. And again, it's a healer, so you're going to be able to get teams. Fury Warrior seems to be the go-to melee DPS for 3v3, and it's a really simple play style at the moment. I think it's really fun. Also, it's got really cool animations now with a lot of the new hero talents. I've seen a couple of people trying the mountain thing out. I would probably still suggest Slayer. And I've been playing my Arms Warrior just yesterday and almost got 2400, and I switched to Slayer. It was so much easier than playing Colossus. So probably want to stick with Slayer. But Fury Warrior is also really interchangeable. You can play with mages, you can play with hunters, you can play with almost every melee DPS in the game. It's really interchangeable in that sense, which makes it a really good specialization because it's simple and easy, and it's versatile and can play with the most amount of specs. So if you're kind of just pugging, which I don't really recommend, I think especially if you're trying to go for Gladiator, you're going to want to find two other players that are playing classes that synergize well with yours, and you guys are going to stick out and regularly queue. I think that is the best way of getting to the Gladiator title. I think very few people actually just pug every single game, and they're playing with different teammates every time, because you're going to have to relearn the composition if its composition has changed, or even just relearn it even if you're playing the same composition because maybe somebody hasn't played it before. And there's just a lot of relearning, which is going to hold you back from accelerating your rating gain. So I would highly suggest that you're going through LFG try your best to try and stick it through with the same team members, at least if you're going to go for Gladiator. Elite sets, I think you can absolutely pug. Beast Mastery Hunter, obviously going to be the best range DPS at the moment. It's the most, most represented here, and it's just really simple and easy, much like Fury Warrior in terms of getting effective damage out. It's not as interchangeable as Fury Warrior, though. I think that you will likely want to play with like Feral Druids or Ret Paladins, and maybe you could get away with Rogues or Death Knights. I've seen a couple of those kind of popping up, but you're probably going to want some type of melee DPS is going to provide pressure while you get crowd control. But it's definitely a really straightforward option, has decent flexibility in terms of compositions, and I find it no surprise that it's represented this high onto the chart. One that is actually surprising is Preservation Evoker. Preservation Evoker is actually really high up in here with 148, especially when you look at Solo Shuffle representation. I think it's probably the lowest represented healer in Solo Shuffle at higher ratings in terms of its potential, but it does a lot of damage. So that's going to be the main focus of Preservation Evoker, and I think most of these guys are playing with Boomkins and Rogues, and that comp does a lot of damage. So if you're a Boomkin or a Rogue and you got a Pres Evoker, you can absolutely just blast out games, big one-shot pressure. I think that's where the majority of these Pres Evokers are going. Some of them also may be running with Death Knights and Demon Hunters or some types of melee cleaves also, but definitely a decent pickup. Affliction Warlock, much more complex to play than Beast Mastery Hunter and a little more difficult to get results with, but if you develop the skills for it, it's definitely a really solid option. You have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can play with. You can play with almost any caster, you can play with almost any melee DPS and have a good run with it. Probably would want to recommend that you play with like a Shadow Priest or maybe a Feral Druid or a Rogue. Rogue is probably the most powerful option for you to play with, but you can still play with some others, especially if you're just going for the elite sets, but you may want to be a little bit more picky as you're starting to push towards like the absolute top end of the ladder. But Affliction is a great pickup. Feral Druid, much like Fury Warrior, I think the trade-off is that it's just not as simple as Fury Warrior, but it's definitely as flexible and definitely as powerful, so do not write it off. Feral Druid here with Shadow Priest I think is still one of the best compositions in the game, but obviously Feral Druid with Hunter. I've seen a lot of teams just run up the ladder really fast with Hunter compositions, especially Feral Hunter or Ret Hunter, and they've been able to get a lot of wins. Ret Paladin on the easier side. You can play like Ret Warrior, you can play Ret Windwalker, you can play Ret Feral, you can play pretty much anything as a Ret at the moment. I would probably personally recommend that you play like Ret Paladin BM Hunter or something like that. I think it's going to be a lot more just like straight pressure and getting you a lot more fast results. But Ret Paladin is a great option. Assassination Rogue, really good representation in the 3v3 bracket. In Solo Shuffle, Rogue's representation starts to fall off, but when you can be more coordinated, Rogue starts really dominating. It's going to be obviously more complicated than Ret or Fury Warrior in terms of finding success with it, but it's also really flexible with the compositions that you can play. I probably want to recommend that you play with some type of range DPS, a Shadow Priest, a Mage, or a Warlock, maybe even a Boomkin in some cases. It just does really good pressure. It's got insane damage output. Spam Garrote is really strong at the moment. It's a great pickup, and those compositions will likely deliver you a lot of success. Shadow is still a really solid option at 121. Shadow Priest in the top 5,000. Feral Shadow Priest, Rogue Shadow Priest, Warlock Shadow Priest, probably your top three kind of go-tos, and you can get the Holy Paladin in there. You might be able to throw in some other healers like a Resto Shaman or a Druid if you really wanted to as a substitute, but I think it's based on the data we're seeing here, it's going to be pretty obvious that Paladin is probably going to be what you want to bring into the mix, but definitely a good option. Still going to be harder than Beast Mastery Hunter and more complex, but definitely more than feasibly doable. Elemental Shaman, really strong pickup right now, and it's not that hard. It's got a lot of instant cast damage, and much like Disc Priest, if you get kicked, it's not the end of the world. You have so many schools of magic. The most powerful Elemental Shaman comps I've seen typically have been like range DPS plus Outlaw Rogue, like Caster plus Outlaw Rogue, or Caster plus Feral Druid. Those are kind of the most common that I've seen for the spellcasters. I would absolutely recommend those. You could run Warlock Shaman though as well, or Boomkin Shaman has been a decent pickup composition that I've seen popping up. It's a really good one. It's probably more middle of the pack as opposed to simple or complex, but could definitely get you the results. Frost Mage is probably going to be your best mage special. It is your best mage specialization if you're a mage and you're trying to get like these last second rewards for the season is over. And you are very flexible as well. I would probably recommend that you play with a rogue, preferably an outlaw or assassination. You can make subtlety work. I think it was Vindaruki actually just re-rolled to a sub rogue and was playing at 2400 MMR just a couple days into playing it. So subtlety rogue can definitely get you results. I think assassination outlaw are just more guaranteed, more proven at the moment. But you can play with a couple of casters as well, like Warlock Mage. You probably want to avoid, Boomkin Mage or Hunter Mage or something like that, but you could play with almost all the melee, if not all the melee. Feral Mage was a really powerful comp for a long time, and then interchange the healers. Paladin first priority, but you can definitely bring in other ones as well. Probably want to avoid class stacking, though, is the only thing. Demonology Warlock has a pretty solid representation here as well, in the middle of the pack at 110, just a little bit under Affliction Warlock here. And I think a lot of these Demonology Warlocks are playing with Shadow Priests. That's just a really good, just basic caster composition. It gets you a lot of pressure. You probably play with mages and at least shamans as well. But I think the Shadow Priest variant is just really durable, can kind of just outlast and do a truck ton of damage. It's a really good counter rogue build as well. Definitely the Shadow Priest Demolock is a comp that I would want to go to with that. Resto Druid still holding strong as well with 107 in the middle here. It's a third of Paladins and half of Priests, but still definitely doable as a Resto Druid or a Mistweaver Monk. As a Resto Druid, you kind of have two options. You go the passive route where you play with casters like Warlocks and Shadow Priests, and you play really defensive, stay in the back, heal them up, and get into dampening. You can do that with melee DPS as well. Fury Warriors and Death Knights and Ret Paladins, I've seen that. You can play a really safe strategy. I have not seen a lot of Resto Druid Rogue Mage kind of aggro Druids, which makes me think that's probably not the playstyle. You probably just still play very passive in the back in 3v3. So if you want that type of playstyle, you can do it. Mistweaver Monk is going to be very similar in that sense. Just you can play passive, or you play a Fistweaver build. Maybe that's honestly the best way if you want to just zug your way through as a healer. You play a Fistweaver build, get like a Ret Paladin and a Fury Warrior, run in there and just Fistweave and just zerg people down. Can definitely be a good option. Honestly, it has the ability to flex between a lot of them. So if you have the gear sets, you can play Fistweaver and you can play Ranged Mistweaver and likely still see really good results across the board. Boomkin is holding out in the middle here. I think this is like directly in the middle at 73. Rogue Boomkin is by far the best composition for Boomkin. It's just blasting out insane damage. But I've been playing Warlock Boomkin, Hunter Boomkin, and getting my glad wins on those compositions as well. So it can play with some other things. It's just Rogue is going to make your life easier as a Boomkin. And I've been playing with a lot of different healers. I think Paladin's probably my least games played with. So you can still do well with the other healers. But I would definitely recommend Rogue Boomkin if you're a Boomkin player or even a Rogue player. I think it's a really good comp right down the ladder. Resto Shaman, it's 68. Despite, I think a lot of people probably perceive it as like the weakest healer. It still has a lot of representation in the top 5,000. Resto Shaman can be a really flexible healer. You can play Zerg comps. You can play with the Rogue Boomkin comp. Might be actually your best option, especially if you can get an Outlaw Rogue. But you can play, you're very flexible. It's just going to be a little bit more frustrating because you have to cast a lot more than Holy Paladin or Disc Priest. And if you get interrupted, it's way more punishing than those classes. But you can be really disruptive and really make a lot of plays with Lightning Lasso and Static Field Totem and have some cool opportunities. And obviously the representation here shows that it is possible to see success with it. Outlaw Rogue, I would debate is the best spec in the game, even despite its representation being, towards the bottom middle. I think it's really complicated. It's very hard to play. If you can pull it off and get to the highest level of it, you're going to reap the rewards of that, though. But if you're on a short time frame and you don't have a lot of time to get good, you have a lot of hours to play, you're probably going to want to avoid it and go for the Fury Warrior instead. But if you have the time, I think it is definitely worth the investment. Windwalker has been popping up a bit here into the middle of the pack as well. I think Windwalker Death Knight can still be a really good composition. It's a flexible melee. I think its pressure might be a little bit lower than Fury Warrior, at least its sustained pressure, but its cooldowns can definitely still be very intimidating. Probably has a hard time, similarly with Fury Warrior, though, against Frost Mage and Hunters, and you can see that the representation is pretty high towards the top end of that. But like a Frost DK Windwalker team could easily cleave out like an 1800 Elite set, in my view. And I mean, look at what we got. You got the Devastation Evoker right next to it. It's the same type of deal, right? Devastation Frost DK has been the staple comp for Devastation Evoker on the ladder to get titles with. Just really good setup pressure and AoE burst damage. And I would basically recommend that comp as the main go-to for Devastation. Same thing for Frost DK. You can play Devastation Evoker Frost DK or Windwalker Frost DK, and the whole point is just gripping enemies together, grouping up, stunning them, and blasting them with AoE damage, and they're kind of all holding into the same point of the pack here. Destruction Warlock, you're probably going to want to focus on caster compositions so that not all of the pressure is thrown your way. So like Destro Shadow, Destro Frost, Mage, those types of compositions. Although, the Rogue, I could see Rogue Destro. I feel like you probably want to be Affliction instead, but Rogue Destro could definitely still support it really well. Enhancement Shaman, this guy's got a lot. I've seen a lot of Enhancement Shamans cheesing with Subtlety Rogue one-shots. As Stormbringer, it can be a good way of like cheesing some wins. Definitely if you're at lower rating, I would recommend Stormbringer for Enhancement Shaman. But Totemic as well can do really good with Windwalker Enhancement Shaman or Warrior Enhancement Shaman. It's a lot better than the representation would show here. And those are the compositions that I would likely want to be playing if I was going for it on my Enhancement Shaman. Havoc Demon Hunter still has decent representation as well here in the 3 versus 3 bracket. I think I've seen a lot of them playing with Ret Paladins. I think it's just Ret Paladins provide them a lot of support, and they give them the finishing power that they don't have because you don't really have a lot of burst damage as a Havoc Demon Hunter. So playing with high burst specs like Ret Paladins is definitely going to be really good, or maybe even Boomkins. But it's going to be very scary comp. It's going to be very flimsy. I think Ret's going to be more stable, and I've seen the most amount of success from players coming through with Demon Hunter probably on Ret Paladin. Demon Hunter as their comp. But I could see like a Death Knight possibly. I don't know. Maybe the burst damage isn't there enough. Maybe if you bring a Frosty Kit, it could be. I would probably recommend the Ret Paladin Havoc Demon Hunter deck for now. Unholy DK, I feel like I see Unholy DK BM Hunter is one of the most represented comps for Unholy Death Knight, but you can definitely get a Devastation Evoker in here for some big AoE. You could probably bring in a lot of different things, but it's going to feel a bit weaker, I think, than a lot of the other melee options. So definitely recommend sticking more towards like Fury Warrior on DK, BM Hunter DK, try and abuse some of the powerful specs towards the top that are easier to play with your partners to try and grab some spots on the ladder for your rewards. Arms Warriors coming in, we're getting now towards the bottom end of the ladder. I think that's likely its survivability is the main thing holding it back from my personal experience playing it. Survivability seems to be the main issue for it. You just get kited out by a lot of these classes. Outlaw Rogue can outlast you and just burst you down and kill you really fast. But if you were going to try and make it work as an Arms Warrior, again, Ret Warrior is kind of like almost a failsafe almost every season that you can run and get really good results with. So I would likely recommend the Ret Paladin Warrior. You could get a Disc Priest in there, Mistweaver. You could really get any healer plugged in with that comp, but that would probably be the go-to that I would want to go for. Now, Arcane Mage also, the advantage of these specs towards the top, they're mostly instant cast or they can't be interrupted, right? And as we're getting towards the bottom, it's either these specs have low survivability or they're really easy to shut down or they're super complex. So Arcane Mage is super complex and really easy to shut down. So that's a double whammy right there. So it's like, much like Outlaw Rogue, you're probably going to want to go into this if you're a professional, if you want to make Arcane Mage, but it's still I think it's the most fun spec when I play it. I had the most fun playing the spec. But if you're running low on time and low on skill, it's probably a spec you're going to want to avoid. You're going to probably want to play Rogue Mage exclusively with this because the Rogue is going to make your life a lot easier to set things up. And you can play any spec of Rogue, Assassination, Outlaw, or Subtlety, I think, as a composition. Subtlety Rogue. Again, Subtlety Rogue, I think, is a lot of cheese one-shots, so pairing yourself up with a cheese one-shot class like a Stormbringer Enhancement Shaman or a Ret Paladin or a Mage are likely going to be your kind of best go-tos, but much like Arcane, it's more complicated, so its representation is a little bit lower. Holy Priest, kind of a rough ride here with only 28. I think Holy Priest is usually just not very popular, but it's also not super strong at the moment. So you could probably run some cleave comps, Ret Warrior, I think that's still a good default, or Rogue Mage, still really good default for you, or Feral Mage are probably going to be some of your go-tos, or maybe even Jungle, but I think Jungles are probably going to prefer Disc Priests or Paladins in a lot of cases, but you're kind of the substitute, the fill-in healer. It's going to be a little bit, it's just going to be harder for you, but those are your best comps, I think. Survival Hunter, really low on the charts here. Really low. It's going to be rough. I've played with a hunter who's tried to play Marksman, Survival, and BM has been getting the best results for us, at least compositionally. So Survival, the best comps that we see throughout the years have been like Rogue Survival Hunter, but even that's probably not great. I think Ret Hunter is probably a better ladder comp, or maybe even Fury Warrior Survival Hunter if you're going to really do it, but all your teammates are going to probably just be like, man, why aren't you BM, unfortunately. So maybe the rework in 11.1 is going to change that and the updates towards your class, but right now it's a rough ride. Those are just best options that you're going to be able to find, but it's probably going to be rough if you're pugging a lot because people are just going to be wishing you were BM. Fire Mage is really low again. Its survivability, it's got mostly instant cast damage, which is the advantage, but survivability is so low. That's why we see its representation down here, and it's going to struggle hard with LEs and BM hunters and these comps that are the most represented specs at the moment. And basically Frost Mage is now as instant cast as Fire, but also snares enemies. So it's like you're the same spec, but you don't snare people and you're squishier, so why would anyone play you? It's going to be hard. I would recommend that you play like Rogue Mage, something where you just kind of run away and let the melee DPS do stuff while you just poke instant damage and hope you can win. But much like Survival, people are probably just going to be wishing you were Frost. Marksmanship Hunter, same deal. They probably just wish you were BM. You're very squishy. You're easier to play though, right? They got the simplicity element of it for marksmanship hunter, but pressure seems to be kind of hard. Would likely recommend jungle as like the main to go to, or ret warrior. But in most cases, you're probably just going to want to play Beastmaster Hunter if you're in these last moments, especially, and really struggling to find teammates. But if you can find a team willing to make it work with you, I think it's possible. It's just a matter of convincing the general public perception. And then AUG Evoker, there's actually 5 of them that have managed to get to this point on the ladder, which I'm honestly surprised about. I didn't think that many people would even bother to get up here. But usually AUG Evoker compositions is something like AUG Evoker Feral Druid, AUG Evoker Warrior. It's usually AUG Evoker plus best melee DPS, plus best healer. And those are kind of the go-tos. But with its representation being that low, you're going to need to be a specialist probably, and likely convincing people to drag you along. But those are my thoughts for the classes here for the 3 versus 3 bracket. The compositions, how your likelihood of success in terms of pushing towards those end of season ratings rewards. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. Thank you guys very much for supporting the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.